Okay. Okay. I think we can start. It's 5:40. So let's start. Hi, everyone here in the room for CBOR Working Group. Please note the note well. We have minutes being taken by Michael. Thank you so much. This meeting is recorded. Your presence is logged. There are blue sheets going around, and thank you, our Jabber scribe as well. And we have our chair, Jim, in remote. So for the agenda today, we have a short introduction about the working group status and the working group document status. Then Karsten is gonna walk us through some CBOR specification issues left. We'll talk about CDDL, the ways forward, and we have some flex time, and these times are definitely not final, so we can move some time around if we need to. Finally, we will wrap up. Any agenda bashing? No. Okay, so status update. We got 6 interims since IETF 105. I thought these were really useful. We progressed the documents. You can find all the information about them. The recordings are on YouTube, minutes, slides, everything we have on this link. The rechartering has been finalized since IETF 105. The CBOR array tags and CBOR sequences document are in RFC editor queue. So great job with those. And finally, we have CBOR-B's version 9, which has started its working group last call in last week, Thursday last week, and that will go on until December 12th. That's a long working group last call because we have IETF week and also some holiday going on after that. So please do send comments about this. Before we move on to the CBOR-BIS, I wanted to discuss interims. So now that basically CBOR-BIS is almost done, we might want to stop the interims every 2 weeks. But me and Jim were suggesting to have these 3 interims up to end of January. So these are all on Wednesday, December 18, January 15, and January 29, all Wednesdays, in the same time slot. And then we can have interims when we need them, if we need them. Do you have any opinions about that? Thumbs up from Karsten. 4 to 5 UTC is the time slot. So let's make sure that they don't collide with the core interims if those continue, which I think they will.
Carsten Bormann, they will, but they will probably also go to a slightly slower pace. So we will have...
You're saying they will collide?
No, they will go to a slower pace. So we will also not have one every 2 weeks.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah, then we can start talking about CBOR-BIS.
Yeah, so I have one slide about CBOR-BIS. It's done. No, it's not quite like that. Whoops. So just as a reminder what this was about, we are planning to take CBOR to internet standards. So this is not the time for great innovations. This is the time for fixing things, looking at interoperability, making improvements in specification quality, because that is probably the biggest source of potential interoperability. problems, and we had some 29 issues that Paul and I closed since IETF 105. So there was some work. The document does look a bit different now. It still has the same substance, but it has a different structure. And as Francesca said, we are now in the working group last call. So I think the biggest thing that we managed to do is understand the various kinds of errors in a better way, and also understood where these errors could potentially be handled. So we clearly separated non-well-formed from invalid situations. And if the document is, if the data item is not well-formed, there's not really that much you can do. And we now have corrected pseudocode for that. There even was a small bug in the pseudocode in the appendix for well-formed. And then the other question is the semantics okay? And semantic errors are, of course, also errors, but it may still be possible to present a data item with semantic errors to the application if there is a way to indicate those errors. So the first two of the three levels here are levels that happen at the level of CBOR in the generic decoder, for instance. And then there is the third level. Of course, the most applications will need some form of validation on top of the validation the generic decoder can do. And this is out of the scope of this document. And that's where either handwritten application code comes in and or some form of data definition language like CDDL or JSON schema org or UDDF or JDDF or however it's called right now, or JCR, or there are lots of these that are out there and can potentially be used for CBOR data items. So I think that's a good thing that has happened, and I think we have pretty much completed this change. Other significant changes, we now have not only have an appendix with working examples, we now also have an appendix with examples that have well-formedness errors. We have discarded the concept of strict mode because it meant too many different things. And we also do not paint the idea of a CBOR firewall. That was probably a bit misguided. We had a bit of tightening on the JSON to CBOR conversion issues. So since CBOR has a richer data model than JSON, there is sometimes the question, how exactly do you interpret some JSON in a JSON to CBOR conversion? We are not standardizing this, but we are defining enough that an application protocol can essentially just reference the section and maybe provide a little bit more information how it wants its conversion being done. As I said, we fixed a bug in the appendix with a pseudocode for detecting well-formedness, and we worked on validity, and there we now have the validity in the basic generic data model, which is exactly two things, correct UTF-8 syntax and non-duplication of map keys. And then we have tag validity. And of course, since we have dozens of tags, we have dozens of different things that can go wrong there. And given that the number of tags is supposed to grow, the idea that a generic decoder is a completely validity checking decoder is rather unlikely. All generic decoders will have limitations there. And the important thing here is that these limitations are documented, are communicated to the application, so the application knows which parts of validity checking it has to do itself because it hasn't been done by the generic decoder. So that is pretty much what has changed. Of course, there are 29 issues, so there were many things that were on the editorial level, even more complex editorial things. And there is one open issue. Actually, there are two open issues, but one is just the task that we have to do. It doesn't have anything to do with the document. And the other open issue is what onus do we exactly put on an application protocol definition how to handle duplicate map keys. So first of all, it's interesting that we are not even discussing this for UTF-8, for the UTF-8 validity. But for the map keys, it's a little bit more icky because, well, different implementations handle it in a different way. And that's not something that we have invented or misdesigned or something, but it's something we inherited from JSON. And interestingly, nobody in the JSON world is concerned about this issue. Well, yeah. So how do we handle it? And my proposal is to essentially punt and say, well, we live in a world where not all decoders will be validating in this space. So it will be the unusual case that an application protocol says must error out on a duplicate map key. And the problem really is that many decoders by construction just silently discard duplicates. So I spent a couple of days between the IETFs trying to fix my main CBOR implementation to detect duplicate map keys. And it just turns out it's much more difficult in the platform I'm coding to than I thought it would be. And I think other decoder writers will have a similar problem. So the generic decoder may be discarding duplicates, and it may be discarding the early ones or the late ones or something in between. We don't know. The application has little control because it only sees a very nice, well-formed map. So that's the normal situation. There may be some applications that actually have to require validity checking. So that's not outlawed, but this is the unusual case. So there is actually a must in the text, and the must here is the application protocol designer needs to make up their mind. So is it one that will work with most decoders, or is it one that actually needs a decoder that does the validity checking? So my proposal would be to put a won't fix on the number 3, and Jeffrey, you put this issue in. Luckily is here, so maybe he can have an opinion on that.
I think he's reviewing the issue. Let's give him a couple of minutes.
Yeah, maybe we can. Oh no, that was all.
Okay, Sean Leonard.
Hi,
I
Sean.
actually just have an observation or a question. Given the extensive use of JSON and protocols and so forth, are there a class of known security vulnerabilities that have been reported that exploit duplicate map key issues and the different ways that decoders handle it? Because I'm not personally aware of cases where it's actually been shown to be an exploitable problem. And I think that if it is, then it's much more important. But if it's not, then maybe that just shows actually it's not that big of a deal.
This is Jeffrey Eskin. I'm going to ask our security team about that question, whether they can give some examples of JSON vulnerabilities caused by duplicate keys. I do feel like even if we don't want to require applications to like require, say, picking the first key or something, that the text still needs to change, because right now it says like make an intentional decision, and it's not clear what they could decide. If these are the two choices that either kind of pick an arbitrary one or error, like if those are the choices that are available, we should just list them, I think.
Paul Hoffman. So it's not an arbitrary choice, at least in the JSON. We've seen ones where once you hit a duplicate, it swaps in the duplicate. It forgets the first one. And we've seen them where once it sees one, it ignores it. So going back to your question, Sean, if there is a security vulnerability found, it's likely to be in just one of those, not both of them. So if we say pick one, then we're picking, we're hoping that all the security vulnerabilities were in the other one, which doesn't seem likely to me. And certainly if we revisit this question 5 years from now, it also doesn't seem likely. The other situation here why I agree with Karsten on no change is unlike JSON, we have indefinite length maps. So if we say you got to be careful, you got to do it, there are given that we have indefinite length maps, there are a whole class of applications that are very appropriate for CBOR that are completely inappropriate for JSON, where we're now saying you have to remember every key you've seen. Whereas for some of these, it would make great sense to say, I'm only going to look at, like let's say the key is numeric. I'm only going to look at ones that are divisible by 10 or what, like there's things like that. And you don't care because there's all these down. Now, if we're saying, oh, no, you've got to save all the keys, that's really bad.
Okay, so before Lawrence, Jim was in the queue. So Jim, you're up.
So one of the types of cases where you actually could have a security vulnerability is in COSI. If you use the critical header parameter and you put two of them into the protected header parameters, different applications may pick up either the first one or the second one as being the one that they care about. And that could produce a different security answer.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the situation where the security problem comes in, where you have one data item that is interpreted by multiple different implementations. So, for instance, player A generates some data structures, player B signs it, and player C interprets it, and that's where these problems come in.
So, Lawrence Lundblade. So I actually wrote the code that Jim was just talking about since the last IETF. And had to think about what was going to happen with duplicates, because COSE specifically says no duplicate header parameters. So that detection, I wound up implementing it in the COSE layers, not in the CBOR layers. So it's not a characteristic of the decoder, it's a characteristic of the thing above the decoder, above the generic decoder.
But you're not going to see the duplicates if the decoder simply discards them.
Depends on how the decoder works.
Yeah, but most decoders actually work by discarding one of the duplicate keys.
But some don't.
Some don't.
Yes, and some don't. And the ones that don't, then the how you handle the duplicates is a characteristic of the thing on top. So it seems, I don't know. It seems there's a lot of variability here, I guess is what I have to say.
Mike Richardson, and so my brain's not very working well. Unbounded map, is that the right word? Indefinite. I knew that was the wrong word. So with a pull parser and an indefinite map, you would not, until you got to the end, you wouldn't know if there was another key. So you would, in a pull parser, return the first one, and you're done. You found it, right? And so any ability to say you should validate means that you always have to go to the end of the stream,
Yes.
right? So it's not even a
That's-
question of you'd have to remember it. You have to process all gigabyte of data, even though the thing you want was specially arranged to be in the first, kilobyte. So it would be
That's-
very bad to say something like this.
That's a fundamental
And-
issue with maps. Yes.
Yeah, and so I would say that I think we should make some recommendation as to whether you should keep the first or the last, okay? But I also think that we should say very strongly that, they're probably that it's probably indefinite. We should make a recommendation, not a must. If you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, except there is no good recommendation.
I think picking none is worse. That's all.
Okay. Sean Leonard, I actually think picking none might be okay. So I respectfully disagree with that. I think the no change is okay. I have another observation though about this duplicate map keys problem. I think that it's much more serious when the attacker controls the production of the map keys. So
Yes.
that so if you ask for user supplied or attacker supplied data and the attacker provides the map data as opposed to the map keys, it's not really a big deal because the keys are chosen by the secured code base, more or less. It's when you ask a potential attacker to supply the keys themselves, right? Or an open-ended production of keys where it could intentionally construct pairs that have repeated keys. That's that's a source of potential additional security vulnerabilities. And that's really common to maps in general, not a CBOR specific thing.
Hey, hi, this is Henk. So I think there's almost nothing left to say for me, except that I'm pro no change, which sounds strange when you say it out loud. And I always assumed that the last key was the valid key. With indefinite maps, I think you should be very careful in case to allow them in any case, because it can be a real big issue. But still, I would not recommend first hit but last hit in that case. But just a personal opinion. I don't think that is for me to decide, but I am in favor of the proposal.
Thank you. So actually, if you look at the JSON objects, they are a bit like indefinite maps in CBOR because you don't have information from the beginning how long they are going to be. So I think we are quite close to what happens in JSON here. And I haven't done a serious search about the check versus use problems that we are talking about. So I'm not aware of any such problem that exists in the JSON world, but that doesn't mean it won't exist at some point. As Jim pointed out, we even know places in our data structures where it could become a problem.
My name is Stuart Cheshire from Apple. Listening to this discussion about duplicates, it made me think to check RFC 6763 for DNS service discovery to see what language we had there. And there we said if there are duplicates, you take the first and ignore the rest. And there is some precedent for doing that. And I think with the discussion of indefinite maps, if the defined behaviors take the last, you always have to read to the end. Whereas if you take the first, when you find it, you know you have it. I think that language should specify which is the right thing to do. Otherwise, different people do different things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would be most happy with language saying kind of you can either pick the first or error. I'd be fine with you closing with this with no change, and I'll come back if the security team comes up with examples and we can reopen it. But that change is what I prefer.
If you can take the first, you can fully validate. So there's never a reason to do the first. Yes. If you read to the end, yes.
Okay, so I'm having a bit of a hard time reading the consensus here because I hear a lot of different opinions and people are nodding or shaking their heads.
Yeah, Alexei, personal opinion, again, either take first or error. But I hope no change doesn't mean not saying anything about the issue. I would
The
rather
issue
you.
is in there.
So the document already explained that this is a problem. Just
Yes.
doesn't. Okay. Fine.
And it says the application protocol designer must say how to handle this problem, but it doesn't do what Jeffrey just said, list the options. But I would not be happy with requiring generic decoders to always take the first, because that is expensive in certain situations. Yeah, it's those situations where the generic decoder generates a platform dictionary from the data. Then you just take the key value pairs and stash the values under the keys into the dictionary. And when you're done with this, the last one has won.
Alexei is thinking. There's Jim in the queue.
If you do that, then you already can store the whole thing in memory, so you can probably do the right thing.
Well,
I'm not entirely sure I understand the argument for.
For the decoder, it may be twice the work to first look up the thing and then only if the lookup fails, stash the thing.
Mike. Pete, do you want to go to the mic? No? Okay. That was Jim. Yeah. So, Jim, you're up.
I mean, I don't know that I agree that it'd be twice the work, since you kind of have to do the lookup as part of inserting it into the dictionary. I mean, I think that the answers are 1, take the first, 2, error, or 3, return all of them and let the application deal with it. Because there are cases like, when you're doing streaming, that you are going to want to be able to return all of them.
Exactly.
I was also going to say that if you're filling a native map, you can always check for presence before you insert. And there are a lot of map APIs where that does require 2 lookups, but there are some where it doesn't.
Michael, so if you are processing a big map and you are interested in a subset of the keys, which is a sort of a variation of the poll parser, then for the subset of the keys, you don't have to store them all. You just care about the subset that, so a gigabyte of map data and you're interested in 12 keys. Okay. So you may have to read to the end of the data stream anyway to find out if all those keys are there. If there are some that just don't appear, right? You're still looking and still looking and still looking. And so that may not be so terrible. Most dictionaries lookups under the hood, as everyone said, they have to find out where to put the item. And so probably the check if it's already there while you're inserting it. In other words, insert if not already there is probably does not require 2 tree traversals if you have a good implementation.
Okay, unfortunately, not all platforms are good.
Not all platforms are that smart, but under the hood they all do that, right? They're all looking up if they have a tree of some kind for a dictionary. They're all have to find out where to put the item and see if it's there or not. And it's not twice as much work. It's order number of entries in the map, right?
For
Which may be much larger. which may be much larger. right?
No. If you're implementing maps this way, you shouldn't be implementing stuff like this.
Okay.
Most people implement maps using hash tables.
Yeah, but whether it's a hash table or a tree, you have to find the location of to put it.
Yes.
Okay. There's different costs for doing that. Okay. I agree. But in both cases, when you have the new item, you have to find a place to put it. And you would discover whether it's there already.
Yes. And
Okay.
your
in that process.
platform code will even discard the old value for you.
And some of them will
Yes.
do a replace. Yes.
Yes.
Some of them will do a
But
replace
you
without asking. I agree.
Still may not have a good way to actually get at that code.
Lawrence Lundblade, it seems there's cases where you're not going to store the whole thing ever. You just don't want to do that because of the way your protocol works or something like that. I don't know, maybe time you get an entry, you flash a light and that's all you're going to do. Then you have no way to, I mean, you can't do any detection or the first or the last because you just don't know. So if you're not storing it, you can't do anything, right?
Right.
So could you, could you clarify what that would be then, your preferred option for this?
Yeah.
To the microphone, please.
Well, Sean Leonard, if you just care about if one of the keys is there, once you get a hit, you just stop processing the rest of the stream. So you don't actually want to keep on going. You got it, and that's it.
No, the value doesn't matter.
Right.
Sorry. Go ahead. Pete Resnick, I have hopefully a question that might drive us towards something.
Please.
If we find a security problem, an actual, like we've seen this before, it really causes a security problem, what are we going to do?
Well, we already have found it. So we are standing here because we have found the problem.
Oh, okay. No. A security problem. So an actual exploit that can be used because of this ambiguity.
The literature is full of check versus use problems. And the fact that we happen not to know one for JSON just means that people have been reasonably prudent using JSON, maybe.
So we're saying that we are assuming that one such exploit, at least one, if not many, exist. And some of us are still feeling like we should just leave it the way it is.
Yes.
And so it didn't help.
Pete, the reason is.
Thanks for trying.
Pete, the reason is we might find two. One that relies on decoders that do this, and one that relies on decoders do that. I guess since we actually have three choices, I have a hard time believing. Anyways, there could be two, and so us finding one, going, oh, we'll do the other one, isn't. As a point of reference, though, we argued about this for iJSON, and iJSON all we said was must not produce ones that have duplicate keys. I think we punted once. It's okay to punt again. I mean, just because iJSON really is one of the most successful things that we did with JSON. I don't know that all of a sudden we can do better because it's CBOR.
Well, we want to be better than JSON, so that's one reason.
I think as long as we're no worse.
Alexi, I'm not sure it would help, but if we were designing new protocol, we would have picked one, right?
Jeffrey Yaskin,
Alexi, don't go away. Sorry.
It seems like the two options right now are, say, protocols have to decide between pick the first and error, or we leave the text as it is. Did I capture the two options correctly? No.
Pick the first is not a good option because it invalidates about half of the generic decoders out there.
That's not what he said.
We turn from 75 implementations to 40.
So I think, or I thought that the working group kind of has two options. Either we leave the text alone, or we change the text to say protocols must decide between pick the first and error.
Users of CBOR or validators.
Yes. I guess, yeah, we could say protocols have to decide, or they could leave that choice up to the application. But there would be two valid choices, which I think disagrees with Karsten's statement that maybe you want to pick the last sometimes. But
it's not picking it. It's an accident of the way it can be efficiently implemented. There was no conscious decision, because all implementers, of course, know that you never get a duplicate map key. So they didn't care.
Yeah, I mean, even an accidental choice is a choice. And I was suggesting maybe we hum between those options.
Okay.
I think protocols in whatever we do, protocols have to have the option to say they don't care. You can't force a protocol into error or pick the first, because then to make a choice between those two, you have to be tracking the keys.
Yeah. So to answer that, if I understood Jeffrey correctly, what he said is that if we do the change, which is the second option that this working group would hum on, if we do a hum, the change in the text will be either you don't care, or if you care, take the first or return or error. So it's like choices. It's like two choices and then two more choices on one side. Is that right, Jeffrey? That's what I understood. So
this is Paul. I propose we don't hum here. There's more people on the mailing list who count, and a hum with a small number of people is actually more dangerous than a hum with a large number of people.
Alexei, do you want to put your AD hat on?
Can I make you make a choice? I don't know. I might do it in Vancouver if this issue is still being discussed.
So maybe I can add something before.
Okay.
So there is a third option to those that Jeffrey said, which is don't change the processing, and make sure that there is sufficient language around describing why all of the options are bad. I would say that's option number 3. Okay, now you can go ahead.
Yeah, the comment about some implementation will pick last. So yes, they might, but I'm just thinking we have a protocol. We discovered an issue with this. Okay, well, maybe we knew, but now most of us are aware of it. We could make implementations which we consider to be broken to be fixed by adding new requirements. That's an option still available to us.
So this would be what I just said. Do not change the text and add text describing.
I suppose I'm saying more of adding text or ruling out certain choices, if it helps.
Michael here. I think that if I understand the potential security threats, that it only occurs if you have implementations that implement both ways. That one is confused in one way and the other is confused in the other way, and there. So, so you said, if we pick this, the first one that some group of people would have an exploit, and if we pick the other way, another group of people have an exploit. And I would say, well, I would say it's differently. If you pick one correct way, then the people that did the other way are exploited. And if you pick the other correct way, it's the other group of people that are potentially exploited. Okay, but the exploit actually depends upon the fact that you have two interpretations. If we can rule one of the interpretations as being invalid, and I think that that's part of the point of going to internet standard, is to remove ambiguities like there. then we close the exploit. Okay, regardless of which one we pick, we close the exploit because we make everyone interpret it the same way. So now we're just simply arguing as to which is computationally more efficient or more convenient. And how many implementations we would obsolete. Okay. So that's why I don't feel comfortable leaving it as is, because I think that the exploit is there because of the ambiguity, not because of a specific choice, A or B. We require the ambiguity to be in order to make an exploit.
Jeffrey Eskin, we were looking for a JSON example of the exploit, and the security team got back to me with a zip example.
Yes, there's a zip example.
Yeah, in Android, the signature checker checked the version of a file identified by the index, and the parser that actually loaded content looked at the first one. And when those were different, it allowed arbitrary content that was not signed.
Yep, I agree with it.
All right.
And
So
that was also an arbitrary.
Jim was in line. Go ahead, Jim.
What Michael said is true for Cozy. The only place that it's an issue is with the protected attributes. If you have it happen in the unprotected attributes, well, you're not supposed to trust them anyway. So if your code is screwing up because it picked up the wrong one, it doesn't really matter.
all right. So I think whether or not there is a security vulnerability is dependent on the protocol. Some protocols don't, like just as Jim said, in the protected headers in COSE, it matters. In the unprotected headers, it does not. In the COSE says you can't have a duplicate header parameters. So the text maybe should be, if you are designing a protocol that has a security issue with duplicate headers, pick one. Pick first or pick error, whatever you do. If you have a protocol that would incur a vulnerability, you need to pick one. If you don't, if there's no vulnerability, if you're just flashing light or something like that, then you don't have to pick one.
Sean Leonard, I think that it sounds from Jeffrey's description, the security problem comes from when you have, whether a second piece of software or a second process looks at and parses the data item from the original source material versus taking the results of the decoded item in the first pass when it was doing validation or authentication. If the first process takes the map and it sees the first or the last or picks one arbitrarily and then passes that decoded CBOR data item to the subsequent processes, there should be no exploit either way, because it's only going to see one, and the result of that security check, like authentication, will be yes or no. But if the check just says yes, use this, and they take the original blob of CBOR data and then reparse it using a different decoder, then that different decoder can make a different choice than the original one that did the authentication or the validation, it sounds like.
Yeah, you essentially cannot do that for signed data. For signed data, you always have to work from the original.
Right. Well, you have to work from the original, but then you take the results of the original for further processing to get at the application layer semantics of what the data represents.
Paul Hoffman. So I think we've gone down a rat hole here, because this whole discussion is about decoders that validate. Decoders that don't validate are perfectly valid, are perfectly good decoders. So we can't make assumptions about receivers of the data because it might not be a validating decoder. So, oh, well, look, if we have to do this one, we can make it safer. We can't make it safer. We can only make it safer for decoders that are validating, and we don't know if decoders are validating. So I'm still okay with no change from the current text.
Jeffrey Askin, a validating decoder will error here. A non-validating one might pick one or more of the values. Replying to Sean, it's absolutely true that you need kind of two mistakes in order to get a vulnerability here. One of the mistakes is parsing the same data twice with two different parsers, but the other one is a mistake in the specification of the format, that there are two legal parses, or even in zip, like one of the parses is not legal, but it's still possible because the data is duplicated. And so we can avoid that second mistake by changing the definition of the format to require, or the definition of the protocol to require that it pick one of the map keys.
You're saying it has to be that all parsers now have to be validated.
Paul,
No.
go to the mic.
So I'm not saying, Paul said I was claiming that all parsers need to be validating. I don't believe I'm claiming that. I'm saying a validating parser will error. A non-validating parser must return one of the values, a particular one of the values, and we need to pick which value a non-validating parser returns.
So this is a proposal for a change, like the proposal for change of text.
So the duplicate detection can be done either in the generic decoder or in the software above it that is using the generic decoder.
If the decoder doesn't discard
Yes,
duplicates.
if that's right. If it doesn't discard, yes.
That's the problematic decoder, and unfortunately, it's the common decoder.
Yeah.
Most
Okay.
decoders
Oh, yeah. Okay.
discard
I
duplicates.
see. Yeah, I see what you're saying there. So to go back to what I was saying before, then if your protocol can't tolerate duplicate map keys, you should only use decoders that can facilitate the detection that you need. Or so either they do the detection that you need, or they allow you to do the detection that you need.
Jeffrey Askin, I think I would be happy with, I think, three results. One is saying like CBOR, all generic non-validating decoders pick the first, or say the protocol has to say which value to pick, or the protocol has to either say which value to pick or declare that it's not a security critical value. And explicitly saying that if the protocol decides it's not important for security, that it doesn't have to say, I think would be enough warning for me to be happy with it.
Yeah, so I think the net effect, apart from improving the security of the world, is that we declare a significant percentage of the existing decoders non-conforming, which may be exactly what we want to do, but we should do this very, very consciously, please.
Okay, so I think we need to stop the discussion. I thought CBOR base would go really quickly today. Apparently not. But okay, we'll continue in the mailing list. But what I'm hearing is mostly against no change, and we need to work on what text we want to add. Yeah, Alexei.
Can I suggest that, Jeffrey, you send the message to the mailing list? Because I don't know, maybe I'm just being too optimistic, but I almost felt like we're getting somewhere.
Yes, I felt
And
that too.
and I know we need to stop because we're out of time. But
Yeah. Okay. So great. So there are also two new issues for CBOR base that Lawrence has added into the GitHub tracker. I don't think we need to discuss them today. Lawrence is shaking his head. Karsten agrees.
Yeah,
I
I would
think.
hope that everyone in this room submits 2 or 3 little editorial problems that are remaining. So
Yeah.
Lawrence started the trend. And
Please do review the document. Yeah, please go ahead and submit reviews. And you have until the 12th of December. So now we can talk about CDDL ways forward, and we have 10 minutes, so we'll try to be quick. We probably won't have time to go into the details that I was hoping we would. So what we started doing, me and Jim, we started identifying interesting features for CDDL users to go forward. So CDDL features that are not in the CDDL RFC. These are additional features that could go into a CDDL 2.0. And today I'm gonna give a report of the first investigations that started at the hackathon. And the discussion today will probably not happen, but if it did, it shouldn't be focused on the technical solution, rather on the scope of the features and possibly identify pitfalls. So this is the list of new features that were identified. Those were taken from the mailing list and from CBOR, the Carsten's document, CDDL Freezer. So we have prepared a questionnaire, a survey that we will send out. And please fill it in, even if you have been so kind to answer to all my questions, and put in any feedback you have or any questions you have about this. Okay, so probably not going to read them all, but this is the result from the 11 responses. So in green, you have the yes response. Yes, I want this, or I'm interested. The yellow is a maybe, in the future, possibly. And the red is either no, don't do this, or it's mostly this worries me. So it might not be a no, don't do this, but it might be a, if we do this, we need to be careful that this is done right. So I ordered them based on mostly on the yes. And the top 4 features are the module, superstructure, import-export, computed literals, variants, so both CBOR and JSON variants in one spec, and the co-occurrence constraints. Most of these don't need too much explanation, but I try to summarize as well what they mean. So for module superstructure, is about modules for CDDL definitions that can be referenced from other modules. And we identify some of additional features that would be needed to be included in CDDL, like namespacing, import-export, module naming, and versioning. Just checking time to see if we should have a discussion, or maybe let's have a 1 or 2 minutes if you want to go to the mic. And so Carsten said, hard. This is hard. This is also the top feature that everybody wanted. This is just, Alexei, you want to say something? Yeah, so another +1 for this feature, which is hard. But yeah. So these are points that the working group would have to decide on if we get this. And I think, if I don't get this wrong, yeah, so we also have this worries me about this feature. So we need to get this right if we want to put it in. Next feature, let's see if nothing from the Jabber. Okay, so Carsten is a piece of cake about this feature. So this is about computed literals. Right now, CDDL is not defined to be able to compute, and we are considering to add the functionality to define integers as components of a computed operation, or string literals, and operation being concatenation or substitution, or represent CBOR tags as string literals tailored to their semantics rather than serialized CBOR. So these are 3 options. Was that a thumbs up? Thumbs up to 3 in the room. 1 and 2 easy to implement. Yeah. Otherwise, I have to repeat everything you say. So.
Sean Leonard. So what I was saying is, I like 3. I'm in favor of 3. 3 is going to require some design, right? Because there's an infinite number of tags potentially, so there could be infinite numbers of representations. 1, well, it depends on the tag, right? So it's extensible. For 1 and 2, it's easy to implement, as Carsten said, but I think that it will clutter specifications and make them harder to read and make it much less obvious, right? So, right, because the literals then go all over the place. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Hank.
So this is Hank. I'm to blame for 1. And this is due to I'm writing a lot of CDDL, and a lot of the content comes from the old world. And sometimes they have this byte offsets, and I hate creating scripts to write my own CDDL and compute them, and so this is why 1 exists. It is a convenient feature, and convenience feature, and CDDL per design should be full of convenience features. So that is why I'm really also in favor of 1, and you can do one thing and stop not doing the other. So I mean, you can do both basically. And I think it's not a bad thing, and it might be cluttering, but if you're coming from another specification and you're new to CDDL and translating it, it makes the world so much easier for you.
Sean Leonard. So I'm all in favor of syntactic sugar that makes things easier to read and understand. For 1 specifically, can we have a list or consecutive items where increment is implied or essentially part of the sugar? Are we talking about +1, +2, +3, +4, +5? Or are we actually talking about complicated mathematical operations like ×2, mod 3, whatever for your different symbols, right? I mean, increments is great. That makes a lot of sense. But if you want general purpose Turing machine types of math, then that's a different thing.
That is not what I want, but this is what 1 implies. So as an item 1 implies. So I would not love to see something I cannot parse anymore because the equation is like 2 lines long, and no, this was not my problem. But you're right. There's no scope to item 1, and naturally would have been in scope. So yeah, I'm with you with the complexity then in 3 and the convenience in 1.
Okay. And we have one additional question, which is, can this be done separately from CDDL 2.0? So Carsten saying yes. Paul saying yes. So some of this.
Alexei, what's the difference? Like, extension versus CDDL.
Can you go to the mic? Right. Sorry, Carsten.
Okay.
CDDL has defined extension points, so some of these things can be added without changing the language. And for instance, the symbol plus operator or maybe a substitute operator can be added just as a control operator.
Okay. We have 2 minutes left, so we'll continue in the mailing list anyway for all these features, and we'll get more data with the survey as well. Variants, both CBOR and JSON variants in 1 spec. That's pretty self-explanatory, I think. And co-occurrence constraints. There's a lot of text. We don't have time, so I will stop here. Feel free to go in and read the slides. I also wanted to ask to people I compiled this, asked to compile this form, if it's okay to put this up, since I didn't ask you before. So like to upload it or maybe on the CBOR GitHub and let everybody see your answers, or I can anonymize if you prefer.
Yeah, that was just the thing on the mic. The question is, do you want our permission to disclose our private information? Hank gives permission to disclose his information in the context of this.
Thanks. I think, okay. So if you have objections, I will have to check anyway with people who are not in the room, but if you have objections to your answers being uploaded, please let me know, either now or later. I think, yeah, so the way is forward. The point would be to start a CDL 2.0 document with the features discussed today. We could also hear... Oh, okay, thanks. I would like to know who is interested in working on this document, helping writing it up. We have the usual suspects, Hank and Karsten, but I would also like to hear if anybody else would like to help out more. No one is raising their hands.
Yeah. So this is Paul Hoffman. I'm going to possibly volunteer other people. I just remember during the end of the CDL discussion, there were lots of people who aren't like, the people in the room who seemed interested in it, and they might be more interested in as well. So I don't think we're restricted to it.
Okay. So please, let's continue this discussion as well. Yeah, we will send out the surveys to the mailing list, several mailing lists, and collect more input and feedback. Also, there were several general comments about CDDL that we want to take into account about usability and readability and learnability. So this will also be reported. And blue sheets, if anybody hasn't signed. If Jim wants to say anything else, now is the time. Otherwise, I think we're done. Thank you, everybody.
So those who are interested, the meeting is over, but those who are interested, in the next 10 minutes, I will explain what I will do. Yeah, so I don't have answers for the hard problems. I think designing a good module structure is hard and will require quite something about requirements and so on. Designing a good co-occurrence mechanism probably also is a significant exercise, because we need to understand what are the actual requirements here, and we probably don't want to invent this stuff just as we didn't invent CDDL. It's all stolen from other things. But reuse things like OCL and schematron, and there are lots of things to pick from, and we need to understand which of these we want to pick from. But for the others, can you bring up my slides again?
I don't know if we'll lose Meetico or remote participants, or if that is actually...
It's just for the people here in this room.
Okay, so this is not an official IETF meeting.
We are in the hallway now. Okay. So, yeah. First of all, I wanted to point to this freezer document. It hasn't been updated very much in a while, but it's still useful. There are pieces of solutions already in there. I mentioned that existing extension points can be used for this. And the two candidates that I think are pretty much no-brainers here are computed literals and embedded ABNF. Of course, embedded ABNF is a significant amount of implementation work, but it's actually almost trivial to specify. So let's talk about computed literals first. Those of you who have programmed in Fortran will almost feel at home here. For the others, yeah, it's not beautiful. And maybe we can limit it to the things that we really need at the moment, which I think are plus, minus, and concatenation. But maybe we need a few more. So let's find out. So that's really easy. ABNF, well, once we have .cat, it's pretty trivial how to do this. You need to pull one trick, because text strings in CDDL don't allow new lines. So we actually have to write the ABNF pieces as byte strings. Yeah, but with this little syntactical trick, this is really almost usable in the way it's on the slide right now. So I think we could just go for this. And add syntactic sugar for it later. That's not a problem, but for now, that's, I think, pretty good. One little detail that most people forget when they talk about ABNF. ABNF doesn't tell you how the thing that you are describing turns into a sequence of numbers, which are then described by the grammar. And there are two different ways of usage of ABNF. One where the ABNF describes the sequence of bytes, and the other one where the ABNF describes the sequence of code points. And I think we need both. So we actually will have two .abnf operators, and we have to decide how to call them. Yeah, I don't know how many people are aware of that, but if you have worked with ABNF for a while. Okay, a completely different animal is taking CDDL, which is essentially just a predicate on, this should say a CBOR instance, just a predicate on a CBOR instance, and tells you whether that instance matches or not, and turn it into something different, which returns quite different pieces of information. So defaulting is part of that, semantic augmentations, transformations, and so on. This is a big thing, and that also requires significant design. Extending the expressiveness of CDL requires design, and that would be the CUTS work that we have started, and the co-occurrence constraints. So essentially the two things that need to be done for co-occurrence constraints are predicates, because we need to be able to say whether something is okay or not, and some form of selector. So if we say that one number here needs to be less than some other number, we need to have a form to point to that other number in the data item. And that's sometimes significant complexity. Yeah, syntactic sugar, that requires a way to do transformations. So we could pretty easily say the identifier in front of a single quoted string is another extension point of CDDL. So that would be one way to get away without having an expression language. But to do it in a general way requires a transformation mechanism. And then finally, the module superstructure and the variants are things that should be composed from components that are reusable in some form. So that requires some design. Yeah, and that's one of the features that most people want. So yeah, we should start the design now, but we shouldn't, that shouldn't keep us from doing no-brainers like this. And finally, the JSON stuff really is coming from the other side, where we have a number of JSON-related requirements. The .json operator is a no-brainer. Like we have .cbor, we should have .json, and maybe .jsonseq as well. The variance part essentially requires a way to switch. And then finally, we have the CDDLJ thing, and I would love to hear from people who are worried by that. This is the description of CDDL in CDDL. So this is the content of RFC 8610. And then you can take an existing CDDL specification and make it almost as ugly as JSON schema. Yeah, and one question is whether we actually should expose our planning here a little bit, maybe take the freezer document and actually say what we are setting out to do, and put some of the things that we might be doing in the freezer a little longer while we are working on the other things. So that would be my proposal if we are a little bit further advanced to actually make this the working group document.
Michael, I expressed concern about the CDDL in JSON, and I would like to understand the use case more. I'm worried about CDDL becoming Turing complete and taking over the planet.
It's not Turing complete. It's still the same language.
I realize that, but now that you can put it in JSON, then you can put it into your Turing machine and change symbols on it, right?
Well, you can put text strings in Turing machines as well.
That's true too. Yes, I realize that. But I'm trying to understand the use case better so that I understand what it is that we're trying to do. Because if we're making it a JSON representation, then I presume that part of the reason is we want to write programs that both read and write CDDL.
Yes.
And it's one thing if you say I want to read CDDL produced by a human. And then it's another thing if I start saying I want to produce CDDL by a machine, which I'm then going to feed into a something to produce JSON or something else from it, right? At which point I'm worried about what happens to the debuggability of the resulting protocol, which has been produced by sort of two layers of machine interpretation, right? That's all. I'm trying to understand who wants to use it and why, and that's why I'm really concerned about the thing, and then what things they might prefer not to have in their version of CDDL because it's inconvenient to round trip through their machine.
Yeah, let me give you two reasons why this is useful. One is simply you want to write a tool that does some form of consistency check or some form of search on a CDL specification. That's just easier if you don't have to write a parser, but can just ingest the CDL in parsed form. The other example why I really want to write this and have written most of the code already is that I want to write a thing that converts from JSON schema org and other things of this kind to CDDL. Obviously, the output of that conversion will not be beautiful, but I did this once already in 2016 with the OCF specification at the time. And I found tons of bugs in their JSON schema org as soon as I could look at it in CDDL form. So it's really a useful thing to do. And this conversion is, again, two parts, the actual conversion and the writing out of the human readable CDL. And again, I would like to have a tool that does the latter part so it's easier to write the other kind of tool. And for those tools, it's really good if they are interoperable. That's why it's a good idea to write this down.
I also worry that you're going to end up in a situation where you're going to have to parse it in CDDL and parse it in JSON and then say, these two things are the same thing.
Oh,
that could
that's
be really, really hard.
Well, you first solve the halting problem and then it's quite easy.
Right. Sean Leonard, I just also want to say, since Carson's lists include incorporating ABNF things, I've actually done some work along with Paul Kisviet and others on improving and extending ABNF so that it can handle things like Unicode and a few other things that kind of are directly related to what CDL is trying to do. So I'll try to post some of those drafts to the mailing list. You can see that and see if it's useful to incorporate and also resolve ambiguities in how we can use ABNF more formally to define stuff. So thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm done stealing your time.
Everybody, and thanks Mitico for staying on. Session is hallway meeting is officially over. Oh yes.